Hello, you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
We're all live?
All live, yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Arkins, and I head up the Occupational Health and Hygiene Policy Unit, and I'll be chairing the event this morning. So you're very welcome to our online event, Working from Home, Managing Ergonomic and Psychosocial Hazards. I'm delighted with the level of interest in our online events, particularly this one. We've had over 545 registrations, which clearly highlights the transition that most of us have made from the workplace to home as a result of the pandemic. And for many, this may become a permanent feature to various degrees. So I know for myself personally, working from home has brought its benefits, definitely an improved work-life balance, but also its challenges. So that's why I'm also keen to practice what we preach in terms of managing the hazards from working from home, such as what we're going to discuss today, the psychosocial and the ergonomic hazards. So I truly hope you'll find the presentations from my colleagues today helpful in proactively managing these two hazards. And also we've a range of guidelines and checklists on our Working from Home webpage, which Frank will touch on in the first presentation, and I hope you'll download and review those. So again, hopefully you've seen the agenda. It's been up for the last little while. So my colleague Frank Power will kick off with the first presentation, followed by my colleague Patricia Murray on the second presentation, and we'll have Q&A directly after each presentation. And just to say, to use the chat function, because we've so many on board today, to put your questions in, and my other colleague Barry Devitt will moderate those questions. So without further ado, I'll introduce both my colleagues because it'll allow for seamless transition between the presentations. So the first up to speak will be my colleague Frank Power. And Frank has been working with the Health and Safety Authority as an inspector and ergonomist since 1999. And he's been involved in addressing ergonomic and manual handling issues at a strategic and workplace level. And he's acted as expert witness in the courts. And his main areas of work include development of regulation and guidance, completing regulatory inspections himself around ergonomic risk management issues, and providing ergonomic support to field inspectors and representing the HSA on a range of ergonomic expert groups. Patricia is our organisational psychologist, and Patricia has been with the authority since 1999, and her remit covers all industries and sectors. Her role is to support the authority in health and safety behavioural change initiatives to increase safety behaviour and lead to psychosocial function nationally. And Patricia's been doing a lot of work over the years in relation to developing codes, guidance, presenting on podcasts and presentations, and providing advice and assistance, as well as being the HSA representative nationally, internationally on psychosocial risks. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Frank Power, and he'll start off the first presentation on ergonomics. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Darren, for that introduction, and good morning to everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar today. I'm going to speak on the subject of working from home, managing ergonomic risk this morning. During my presentation, I'm going to look at a couple of different areas. First of all, I'm going to talk about what we mean by ergonomic risks, specifically with respect to working from home. I'm going to briefly go through the legislation, the relevant legislation with respect to managing ergonomic risk in a home setting. I'll also talk about some of the issues to be considered as part of the ergonomic risk assessment, which is a very essential part of the risk management approach for working from home. I'll also talk about examples of research of the prevalence of musculoskeletal disorders, some that we've had over the last couple of years, but also some recent research that we've seen. And also, I'd like to talk about some of the interesting results from some of the working from home surveys that have been carried out on working from home. Some of those results are very interesting, particularly in terms of if we do a comparison between the pre-COVID and post-COVID work from home aspects. And then I'm going to talk about an important piece of guidance that the Health and Safety Authority has produced, which again informs some of the requirements from a legislative point of view in terms of ergonomics. And finally, I'll briefly mention then the plans by the European Union to review and update the Display Screen Equipment Directive, which hopefully is going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. When we talk about ergonomic risks in a workplace setting in the home, there are certain things that we need to be consider and take account of, and certainly in terms of the risk assessment process, we need to think about what's the potential risk exposure for our employees at home. So some of these risk factors are repetition. And this is work where there's a high repetition requiring using the same muscle groups over and over again during the working day. So, and where there's very limited time for recovery. And again, it will vary from person to person because we're all different. We're all doing different types of work in the home environment. So if you're doing very kind of high intensity work, this potentially would be something to consider. Non-neutral work posture, awkward work posture. Again, in terms of the setting at home and the workspace setup, the incorrect positioning of a monitor or seat, a computer workstation can result in employees adopting awkward posture. So you could have bend in your neck for long periods of time. This can contribute to the onset of musculoskeletal disorder. And again, that's very much dictated by the workstation setup. And then we talk about work environment issues, and this can be challenging. We know this is a challenging situation for people because we all have different workspace environments at home. So, the lighting conditions, what kind of space do you have in terms of setting up your workstation setup? What kind of seating do you have? I know initially when we went to this, working from home as a result of the pandemic in March 2020, a lot of people were kind of caught out in terms of what equipment they had at home. So these are very important issues to consider. And then finally, static sitting posture over long duration. There's lots of research and evidence base out there that tells us that it's important to change posture on a regular basis, keep physically active. So these are some of the things that we need to consider in terms of the legislation, because there is legislation, and there has been for many years, around workstation ergonomics. And this regulation is the display screen equipment regulation of 2007, which is incorporated into the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work General Application Regulations. I'm not going to go through all this legislation, but I do want to underpin this particular part of the regulation, which is very important in terms of home working. So in there, we have Regulation 72(1)(b), and this places a duty on the employer to perform an analysis of the workstation in order to evaluate the safety and health conditions to which it gives rise for the employee, and then to take the appropriate measures to remedy any risks found, taking account of the minimum requirements specified in Schedule 4. So it's a risk assessment, what it's saying there. And Schedule 4 talks about different aspects of equipment. For example, display screen equipment. What do you have? What kind of monitors setup do you have? Keyboards, work desk. The minimum requirement would be adjustable seating, work surface, the work chair, the environment, the lighting, space requirements. All those factors need to be considered as part of the risk assessment. And when we talk about the risk assessment, I think this is one of the most important points I'd like to make today. The principal responsibility to provide an analysis of employee workstations and the assessment of risk lies with the employer. Employees are certainly obliged to cooperate with this process, and that engagement between the employer and employee is very, very important, particularly in the home work environment. Providing employees with a questionnaire alone to do their own risk assessments, in other words, a self-assessment, is a delegation of responsibility and does not constitute a risk assessment in line with regulatory requirements. So this is very consistent with what we've always said. It's consistent with what we have in our new guidance. The employer has to be actually engaged, going through the risk assessment process with the employee. It's not a question of just sending out the questionnaire for them to fill it out and to leave it at that. There has to be active engagement, and an assessor, independent of the employee, needs to conduct a risk assessment of the employee workstation. So that's critical. It's the nuts and bolts really in terms of what risk assessment is about. And the ergonomic risk assessment of a workstation, whether this is in the office or at home, has a number of different aspects. First and foremost, a brief overview of the tasks completed at the workstation. So what are you doing actually in terms of the computer work? This is something I've looked at over many years, and you can, for example, I know in healthcare, people could be assessing, different MRI scans and different information on a monitor, and they could be doing this over a period of time. You could have people working on CAD systems with drawings where there's a lot of high intensity work. So we need to consider the type of work people are doing. We need to look at the evidence that all aspects are detailed in Schedule 4 are taken into account as part of the analysis. So you need to look at what kind of seating is available, what kind of work desk is available, And this is, again, two-way communication to get to the, I suppose, the bottom of any potential issues. And then any issues that are identified are followed up and documented in the risk assessment document. And an action plan has to be identified, which outlines the outstanding issues, which stipulates who's responsible and what actions will be taken and when they'll be completed. So this is a traceable document that has to be followed through to completion. And again, the important point to make here as well is what we're trying to do is minimize exposure to risk. So the less risk exposures we have in terms of ergonomics, the better it is from the physical health of the employees working in the home. So examples of working from home issues to consider as part of the risk assessment. Is there a lack of appropriate adjustable office chair? Because the adjustability of the office chair allows us to set ourselves up in terms of our posture when we're engaging with the use of the computer workstation. The lack of knowledge of adjustable features of the office chair. There are many different features in office chair adjustability, and it's important as part of training that employees are made aware of what they do and what's the benefit of each adjustable feature. The lack of appropriate office desk in work surface. This is important, very important as well, because you need to have space on your desk. You need to allow enough space in terms of setup of the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse. All aspects of the workstation need to be considered. Use of a laptop without a monitor, without a laptop stand or a docking station. Laptops are not designed for working for long periods of time. They should be connected to a monitor, or they should be set up on a laptop stand with an external keyboard or mouse. Because this is important in terms of, again, the posture, so that we maintain a neutral posture so that our neck is not bent over for long periods of time. Because the damage in terms of doing this, if we're using a laptop only for long periods of time, this can be cumulative damage potentially, resulting in a chronic MSD, musculoskeletal disorder. The lack of space in the home. Again, sustained sitting posture with limited opportunity for regular change in posture or opportunities to vary work tasks. So if there is an opportunity, again, this is important in terms of the consultation and the planning of work from home, in terms of what people are required to do. Can they take breaks from working on the computer to do other type of work? For example, review documents, or look at meeting with colleagues through through phone calls, and just to get them away from the computer. This is the other part of the legislation I'm not going to go through, but it talks about planning work to allow for change of posture. Again, these are employer duties, providing information and training, a review of the risk assessment, which is a very essential part, and then eye and eyesight tests. So let's talk about examples of evidence and research around the prevalence of musculoskeletal disorders. There have been many studies carried out and evidence-based studies carried out. One here talks about occupational sedentary behavior has been associated specifically with an increased risk of diabetes and musculoskeletal problems such as neck and shoulder pain. However, in terms of the actual reports that we get ourselves in the Health and Safety Authority, at the moment, we have limited reporting of musculoskeletal disorders, and that information we are getting at the moment is through a system that we set up, which is called FOR, the Health and Occupational Research Network. And what FOR really is, it's a voluntary process that we've engaged with occupational physicians, dermatologists, and other occupational health professionals, where they engage with clients who may have symptoms of a musculoskeletal disorder, and that information is recorded, and it's funneled into the University of Manchester, who produce reports on behalf of the Health and Safety Authority on an annual basis and sometimes quarterly basis, which gives us some indication in terms of the types of musculoskeletal disorders that do develop, as well as other occupational diseases. However, as I said, the important point is not just the fact that the rate of illness is reported, but also the risk exposure that you have in your workplace. We know, for example, recently enough, in the 25th of April in the Sunday Times this year, the Irish Society of Chartered Physios reported that they have seen an increased prevalence of MSDs with back pain, neck pain, as a result of people working from home. So we have some evidence which is concrete, but we have other information which is not as evidence-based, and the challenge is we need to get more of that kind of information. And if we talk then about surveys, there have been a number of surveys carried out. For example, the CSO, the Central Statistics Office, who carry out a labour force survey, and in some of their labour force surveys, which are published in the Health and Safety Authority guidance or publications on annual statistics of injury and ill health, would show that there is a high prevalence of MSDs. But also they have done studies around working from home. And in a study they carried out in 2018, they found that 18% of respondents working from home were working from home 1 to 2 days a week. And 28% of public sectors workers were working from home. But as we know, things have shifted along and changed dramatically in the last 12 to 15 months. And we know from studies carried out, survey carried out by the National University of Ireland, Galway, with the Whitaker Institute and Western Development Commission, that the top 3 challenges of working remotely over the last 12 months are loneliness and isolation, staying motivated, and the physical workspace. In other words, the office set up in the home. And of course, Patricia is going to talk to you about the psychosocial aspects and psychosocial hazards in a little while. Working from home, this publication and survey, this is the most recent survey produced by the Whitaker Institute only in the last couple of days. And as you can see, 75% of respondents are working completely remotely since the outbreak of COVID. There was over 6,500 people interviewed as part of this survey. So if you consider and compare that to the 28% pre-COVID, we can see a dramatic shift. 20% of those that were surveyed are working a mix of remote and on-site. So it's a hybrid kind of approach. The vast majority, 95%, indicated that they would like to continue working remotely for some or all of the time after the pandemic. 32% indicated that they would like to work remotely on a daily basis. 53% indicated that they would like to work remotely several times a week. And 10% indicated that they would like to work remotely several times a month. So there is a variation there. People have different preferences, and this is something that will have to be taken into account as we move forward around this area. And then this is another interesting point from this survey just in the last couple of days. There was mixed level of agreement with the extent to which the organisation was providing them with well-being supports, where 67% agreed or strongly agreed, while 18% disagreed or strongly disagreed. And when it comes to ergonomics and health and safety advice, 74% agreed or strongly agreed, while nearly 30%, nearly 1/3 of them disagreed or strongly disagreed. So again, this underlines that there's still work to do. What we need to do further as well is find out more about the actual health and safety setups in those homes in future surveys. That's something I think would be very interesting to look at in terms of what kind of levels of risk assessment, for example. So I'm just pointing you to a couple of other relevant documents. For example, the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment has been working on the development of making remote work national remote work strategy. This is an important document. It was published in January 2021, and it gives it informs, I suppose, the strategy focus around remote working into the future. As well as that, the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council published a document very recently around implications for competitiveness and productivity. So again, as I said, and it's important, as we go through this journey in terms of working from home, that we continuously review how things are developing. And this is no more important as well for the Health and Safety Authority, because when the pandemic really kicked off last year, we had to respond in terms of what kind of advice we could give. So over the last 12 months, we've done a lot of work in terms of developing new guidance on home working. And we have a section on our website. It's if you go in under remote work as a topic, you will find all our information on remote working and working from home centralized in that section of the website. So you've got information on working from home, you've got information on ergonomics, remote working stress, further information, and the link is there for you to follow up on that. So I would encourage you to look at that information because it's very relevant. So the guidance, again, we published in October of last year, and there's been a lot of demand for this guidance. So what I'm going to do is just take a walk through this guidance for the next few minutes, because it's an important piece of the jigsaw in terms of managing the situation at home. So if we look at this guidance, I'm not going to go through all the sections because there's 12 sections, but if we look at the particular sections here, these are probably some of the more important sections: the risk assessment, communication, the home office environment setup, and then the homework risk assessment checklist. Again, the risk assessment talks a lot about the ergonomic risk assessment, and there's a checklist in there on what needs to be done in terms of that risk assessment approach. And again, there's other information in there around managing stress, as well as that they need to develop a homework policy. Homeworking policy is an essential part of the work that needs to be done for managing those who work from home. So let's take a little walkthrough in terms of what the homeworking policy and the managing working from home process how it should operate. First and foremost, we need to develop a homeworking policy. That's the first step. And it needs to involve everybody as a part of that, to have active engagement. And it needs to consider all aspects of homeworking, not just the ergonomic aspects and the risk assessment aspects. We need to identify and consult with employees who work from home. We need to look at identifying the equipment needs of those that are working from home. And this is essential as part of, again, the risk assessment. So if people need the appropriate chair, if they need a proper desk, if they need, external keyboard, laptop stand, all those factors need to be considered, and other issues that may need to be considered as part of the risk assessment. And then after we've kind of identified the equipment needs, the next part of the process then is, once those equipment needs have been provided, that the employer, through the involvement of an independent assessor, carries out the risk assessment of the workstation to assess the home work setup. And following that, once any issues are identified, as we were saying earlier, and any follow-up needs to be carried out in terms of actions to be addressed, there needs to be a review, and someone needs to monitor that the actions have been taken and ensure that the employee is happy with their setup. Because remember, in the history of working in any type of work, it's important that we provide the people who are doing the job with the necessary tools and the appropriate working conditions to allow them to do the job in a healthy way, but also to allow them to do the job in a productive way. So the risk assessment document itself, I'm not going to go through it in detail, but the risk assessment process is a two-step process. The first step, as we said, is around identifying any equipment and resources required. So, what do you have? A dedicated room, chair, laptop? Do you have a desktop monitor? Mouse? What kind of task lighting do you have? All headset, particularly for those who are spending a lot of time on the phone. Do they have headset available? So all these factors, a footrest. Some people may need a footrest. So these factors need to be considered in the terms of the physical environment at home. Because remember, these people are going to be working there for long periods of time over the day. So you need to make sure that they have everything that they need. The homework risk assessment checklist, then, the actual nuts and bolts of it, we'll have questions regarding the office setup, the chair setup. Do you have the adjustability? Do you have a monitor that's set up appropriately? What kind of lighting conditions you have? So any kind of issues then that are identified as a result of that engagement between the assessor and the employee needs to be documented in the risk assessment document. And any findings need to be documented at the end of the document in terms of what actions are followed through. So really what we have here is the potential risk exposures, because if there's certain things that are not available, for example, an appropriate office chair or appropriate adjustable office chair or appropriate monitor, external keyboard, they're going to potentially introduce risk exposure. So all this information needs to be tracked and monitored, and any actions that are needed to be addressed need to be completed. And there should be a review of this as part of the management process. It should be something that should be regularly reviewed to make sure that the items and actions are closed out over a period of time. So as I said, this guidance document, I would definitely strongly encourage you to download it. It's freely available on our website. So the other things that we look at, I just want to go through here, the the last part of the presentation I want to mention, because it is an important part of the presentation, and it's an important thing to consider, particularly now that we have nearly 75 to 80% of people working from home at this point in time. And that's probably going to continue into the near future. And we have to wait and see what's going to happen as things improve with the pandemic. But it looks like working from home is here to stay, and it's just a question then of how it's going to be managed into the future. But because of that, it's important that we mention that the European Union has looked at the Display Screen Equipment Directive. This directive has been around since 1990. However, it has become evident in the last number of years that there's need to review and update that directive, particularly to take account of new modern computer technology, but also to continue to consider new ways of working, and particularly what we're going through at the moment. And it's expected that the European Union will start initial consultation on the review and update of this directive in the next 3 to 6 months. The timeline in terms of when this updated directive will be finalized, I can't give you a timeline on that as yet. I think that will become more evident as we move forward with the consultation process. So in terms of conclusions then, there are a number of things I'd just like maybe for you to take away here today. First and foremost, just to underline again that the employer needs to ensure that an assessor independent of the employee conducts the risk assessment of an employee's workstation in line with the regulatory requirements. It's not a guide, it's a regulatory requirement. So the idea of just giving them a checklist doesn't stack up. The employer needs to develop a home working policy. This is very important, and a lot of work should go into trying to get this right, because ultimately that will really, I suppose, determine how you're going to manage working from home into the future. We need to discourage people sitting for very long periods at a computer workstation in a home. We need to encourage regular movement and task variation. And we need to underline the importance of trying to maintain neutral and relaxed posture and provide the appropriate equipment so that the employees can engage in those types of posture. We need to consider what's been disseminated and provided in the new Health and Safety Authority working from home guidance, which again is available at our website at hsa.ie. And finally, we need to consider as well and keep, I suppose, abreast of the fact that the European Union will be carrying out an update of the Display Screen Equipment Directive over the next 6 to 18 months. So that's really everything I have in terms of my presentation this morning. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Frank. It was an excellent talk. We've got plenty of questions here for you. And the first question I have comes in from Hugh. And it says, with respect to an assessment of a home workplace, can this be done electronically, i.e. via MS Teams with an employee holding in a webcam?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question, Murray. The reality is, yes, we have to be flexible in terms of how the homework station risk assessment can be carried out. For example, the example you mentioned there earlier is a good way of doing it. The important thing is that there's active ongoing engagement. I mean, for example, I've heard about other situations as well where the employee is kind of taking photos of their setup, has kind of pointed out some concerns they have. And this it resulted in, for example, a team meeting, a mic, or else a WebEx meeting or a Zoom meeting where they go through, the workstation setup. And again, maybe the employee may get someone to take some footage of the setup of the workstation at home, take some photos of them sitting at it, and that information obviously has to be treated in a confidential way. But the important thing is, the underlying important point is to see what can be done to minimize exposure as best you can in that setting. So that situation is a good way of managing this and the risk assessment.
Thanks, Frank. The next question comes from Katrina. And Katrina wants to know, as we can't enter people's homes to complete a risk assessment, what do you think is a comprehensive way of approaching a risk assessment? Again,
thank you, Katrina, for that question. I think what I said about the homework and policy, all these factors need to be considered. I think that we're only scratching the surface really in terms of all the different, I suppose, variations and aspects of how we manage this into the future. But certainly, I think it's realistically going into the future. I don't think we're going to have a situation where people are going to be traveling to people's homes to carry out risk assessment. So what we need to do is engage in using the best technology we can to allow us to interact with employees at home. And bear in mind as well that the reality is that it'll likely be a hybrid model into the future. So for example, employees may not be at home all the time. So there will be the office on occasion, and that's an opportunity as well for the employer to engage with those employees in terms of trying to iron out any difficulties and work with them and make arrangements in terms of how they will do the risk assessment of the homework setup.
Thanks very much, Frank. Another question I have here is, how often must a risk assessment be undertaken?
In the legislation, it talks about, in the regulation, it talks about carrying out a review and an updated risk assessment where there are significant changes. So to be honest with you, it wouldn't be something that would have to be carried out, you know, on a monthly basis, unless there's serious changes to the type of work someone's doing at home, or there's new equipment, or maybe, for example, they might be using 2 monitors instead of 1. Unless something like that happens, there should be no need to be continuously updating it. However, it is important that there's ongoing supervision and interaction with employees working from home. And one of the important points I'd like to mention as well, because it is something that is flagged in the homework guidance, is that if someone's complaining or has reported symptoms of, for example, a musculoskeletal disorder, that they're encouraged to report those conditions so that there's an early intervention to manage those.
Here's a question, and it comes in from Owen. And Owen wants to know, how do employers ensure employees are taking sufficient breaks when working from home?
Yeah, thanks, Owen, for that question. I think what we need to say as well here, we all have responsibility here. The employer has their own responsibilities, but us who are working at home have responsibilities as well to cooperate with the employer. And you know, there's legal duties around that. But without even talking about that, you know, it makes sense for the employee to take advice from their employer in terms of what things they should consider to protect their health and safety at home. So, for example, if the employer is encouraged then to take a break, you know, from away from the computer every 30 minutes, just get up and move around for a couple of minutes, then that's something they should do. And it is something really, ultimately, the accountability is with the employee to cooperate with that. And I think, I suppose, in the home working policy again, which should be agreed inside, you know, agreed with employees, that this is something that is underlined and stressed, the need for the employees to cooperate with recommendations such as taking regular break.
Frank, I have another one here, and it's from Stuart. And Stuart says there's some ambiguity in the guidance document on who supplies what between employer and employee. For example, who supplies the desk? Could you clarify this, please?
Yeah. I suppose I wouldn't consider that there's ambiguity as such. I think it's clear enough that the risk assessment has a 2-step process, and the first step of that process where the employer consults with the employee to determine what needs they need in terms of equipment. Ultimately, remember, when we talk about this, this is from a regulatory requirement point of view, and the regulatory requirement is that employers, you know, manage the risks and make sure that the minimum requirements in terms of the Schedule 4 are provided, such as, for example, the monitor, the adjustable chair. So from that perspective, it would be up to the employer then to provide that equipment, and at no cost to the employee, because what the employer is doing is complying with a requirement under legislation.
Thanks, Frank. I have a question on the initial consultation. Is that only open to relevant government bodies? Matthew wants to know that.
The initial consultation on the directive, I imagine. Yeah,
yes.
The directive. Yeah, the actual consultation is going to be managed by the European Union, a European Commission, and I don't have the details of how that consultation process is going to work as yet, because they haven't really gone into a huge amount of detail on it at this point. However, I would imagine I would be very surprised if there was not a public consultation process across Europe to give different bodies and different interested parties an opportunity to share their concerns or their suggestions in terms of how we move forward on working from home in the future.
Frank, I have a question here from James, and James wants to know what is the HSA view on standing desks?
Yeah, thank you, James, for that question. What I say on standing desks, I mean, what I would suggest is that there should be, if someone wants to look at sit-stand workstations, I think you need to take that into account in the risk assessment. However, I have to underline as well, in the current regulation, it doesn't specify that employers have to provide a standing desk. And the other point I'd like to make as well is that, you know, while we talk, and we have spoken, I've spoken about the importance of not having sustained sitting posture, it's not a good idea either to have sustained standing posture, because that can create its own problems as well. So you know, from my point of view, I think, you know, if you have a standard, I suppose, sitting desk, if you can get up and move about, that's as adequate as anything in terms of ensuring that you're not in the one sitting posture for long periods of time. But I'd just like to stress that there's no regular requirement saying that the employers have to provide a standing workstation or a sit-stand workstation.
Thanks, Frank. I've got a question here, and it says, I noticed the word work surface is used. Working from a kitchen table, for example, is that acceptable if the risk assessment determines that it is safe with the introduction of a footrest and appropriate chair and equipment, etc.? See, a lot of people would be working from kitchen tables, Frank, so that's probably a relevant one.
Yeah, I think in the short term, the work surface, again, the important thing about the work surface is that it has the appropriate space, and you know, there are guidance, there are standards around work surfaces or work desks that are used in an office or in a working from home environment. But again, each situation has to be treated in its merits, because I know, for example, some of the queries that we've had in the Health and Safety Authority is that people don't have enough space in their home work environment to put in a work desk. So in that situation, the employer needs to consider, well, is it appropriate for someone to be working from home all the time, or maybe they may have to come into the office a day or two a week. So I think every situation has to be treated on its merits. But you know, some work desks, I wouldn't consider working off a kitchen table in the long term to be a good practice.
Thanks, Frank. I know we're a little bit ahead of time, so I'm only going to ask you a few more questions. I'm going to ask you three more. Yeah. And the first one comes in from Martin. And Martin wants to know, can an ergonomic assessment be conducted online?
Yeah, when we talk about online, for me, how an ergonomic risk assessment online would be where, for example, you set up through a Zoom call or a WebEx call, a WebEx meeting face to face, and get the appropriate information. But I don't think that alone will be enough. I think there will have to be some maybe sharing of other information around the workstation setup. But I suppose the important thing is to zone in on the critical things around the actual monitor setup, that they're not working off a laptop all the time, that the laptop is connected to an external monitor, an external mouse. They need for an appropriate chair. The adjustability of a chair is critical. The importance of them being aware that they need to move about. Again, looking at their workload in terms of the type of work. So, you know, that kind of information in terms of online, I would consider that. When I talk about online, I'm talking about engagement, like what we're doing here today. We're talking to each other through the use of a medium of computer technology. But that can be then supplemented by sharing information, by sending photos, or, you know, conversations through email or even phone calls. I think that's the best way to get through it. But again, the important thing is keep in the back of your mind, what are the potential risk exposures, and how can we minimize those risk exposures or eliminate them as much as possible?
Thanks, Frank. Marcus wants to know, does your equipment at home need a PAT test?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that particular requirement, except that there are requirements in the actual checklist that talks about the electrical safety. So I'm not an electrical engineer or that, so it's outside my area. So what I would suggest on that is maybe if we took that offline, and if they wanted to contact ourselves or myself or our workplace contact unit to maybe look into that in terms of what the requirements are around that.
Yeah, so, thanks, Frank. Here's another question here. If an initial self-assessment is performed by the user, is it acceptable for this to be followed up?
It depends on what we talk about. The user initial self-assessment by the user, for me, would be considered a self-assessment. So I think the self-assessment concept is not, I suppose, that would not meet the requirements in terms of risk assessment. The actual risk assessment process has to involve two parties, the assessor and the user who's working from home. That's the ultimate, that's the model, that's the regulatory requirement.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Frank. I'm just going to ask you one last question because we've given you loads this morning here. We're going to finish up now on this shortly. If an employee's home environment doesn't allow for all elements of safe workstations, e.g. no space for sufficiently large desk, how can that be dealt with given that the employees are currently required to work from home? Is it okay to allow the employee to continue work, e.g. with recommendations for increased breaks?
Yeah, again, I think this ultimately, thanks for that question. I think this ultimately comes back to the home working policy, you know, and how the employer determines that they're going to manage this situation. I mean, thankfully things are starting to improve now, and I know some companies have had some challenges with people working from home because of the lack of workspace. So I think, you know, what needs to happen here is there needs to be engagement and consideration of what options are available for the employee to potentially maybe work in the office at such time as they can be accommodated working from home. So I think, again, each situation needs to be treated on its merits, and that's really the best way that it can be managed into the future.
Thanks very much for that. And I'm sorry for the people who didn't get around to actually asking their questions, but all this information is captured and we will be able to get back to you on this. We are ahead of schedule, so I'm going to hand over to Patricia Murray now, who will start her presentation, and we'll do a Q&A after Patricia's as well. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you very much, Barry, and thanks, Frank. Hello, everybody, and thanks for coming to this session that I'm going to talk to you now about for the next, say, 35, 40 minutes. And then, just like Frank did, I'll go back and take questions. So I suppose the first thing to say is we're talking now about a different area, although very aligned to Frank's. And you'll notice from Frank's presentation how he alluded to the research that shows already that people who are working from home, first of all, the interesting thing is for every 10 of you, 8 of you are saying that in future you want to work sometime at home or all the time at home. So very important going forward that we kind of keep that in mind. And also that, as Frank said, the Whitaker research done recently does show that psychosocial hazards or stressors or isolation and feeling of lack of motivation have been highlighted by us, by you and by me and by everybody as big issues from working from home. So there is an alignment between, you know, the physical working from home, which is Frank's topic, and then my topic, the kind of emotional or psychological fallout of working from home. So what I want to outline here is just set the scene a little bit, talk about psychosocial hazards, talk about the context, because obviously we wouldn't be here, I guess, if there wasn't two different contexts that have made us here. And one is COVID and the other is working from home. And they themselves are also aligned. So there's no independent variable here. They're all, you know, chaotically mixed in together. Look a little bit about what's changed and how that change impacts us, then what stayed the same and how we can use that, and then some solutions for you going forward. And then I want to touch on also Work Positive, our free online tool, which is a tool that looks at organizational stress. And organizational stress is just all the individual stress that comes together within an organizational context, reported by you and other people like you and like me in an instrument that's online and that can then inform the employer of what they might do. So I would advise all of you to look at workpositive.ie after the session anyway, just to familiarize yourself with it. Okay, so first off, hope you're comfortable, hope you're sitting comfortably. And for this talk, obviously, you don't really need to have no visuals, so you could be sitting on the sofa if that makes you feel better. Because one of the important things about psychosocial hazards is they're very aligned to our context, where we are in our mind, in our body. So a lot of the literature, and I'm referencing here a very recent May article in Occupational Health Science, looking at psychosocial hazards. So if we even forget for the moment about COVID or about working from home, from the beginning of my talk, I want you to just think, we call psychosocial hazard what you probably call, and I'm using you because I know there's over 500 of you, but you're all making up the society that we're trying to aim at. And really what we're talking about is stressors, or things that cause us stress or distress. So they're multifaceted and complex. It's not really as simple as we think it is, or we'd like to think it is. It's not a newspaper headline, and it's not what our auntie or sister or brother found stressful last year, or what we ourselves, when we know we're stressed, find stressful. Because even when we're driving along and find it very stressful because we're late for an appointment or whatever it might be, whatever tips us into feeling the stress is usually not just the thing that's caused us the stress. Stress is very complex and it's multidimensional. There are interaction effects. So what we think is the thing that caused us stress is usually just the tipping point. A few other things have happened. And research says, really, there's usually 2, 3, or 4 things that have happened. There are compound effects. So it's usually a build-up. So if we're really unstressed in the morning, we're not really going to find it massively stressful if one thing happens. And that's how you know those people, and I'm sure you know them as I do, who something stressful happens and they kind of remain quite calm and you're really thinking, I'm in awe, they dealt with it so well. Usually what that is that they're not magic people. It's just that they haven't had a lot of build-up of stress in the background of their psyche so that they can deal with one, and so can you. So can all of us. It's just that we have build-ups that we're not aware of. And so then when one thing happens, we might seem or feel that we're overreacting to it. And then we think, why did I overreact and the other person wouldn't? But really, there are compound effects to stress. And also there are interaction effects, which means that one particular type of stressor might really get us and it mightn't really get another. Some people are very stressed by interrelationship distresses or conflicts or things that aren't going right. Others are much more stressed by pure technical work-related demands that they're not meeting. Others are stressed by lack of control. They like to be in control of their environment and that really stresses them. So there are interaction effects between things that they're invisible, and very few of us even know our own ones. But I'm hoping that at the end of this session, and if you want to set it, I always do try to say to people, try and set a little goal for this session. I'm a big fan of goal setting and it absolutely works. So we've talked a lot in the last year about the science in terms of the virus, and obviously there isn't just one science, there's lots of different scientific voices and ways and mechanisms and methods, so there's sciences. But if you look at what we know in terms of the science of psychology and how we are, and we tend to underestimate ourselves and not have good insight into ourselves. So try and set a goal for yourself for this session, that know a little bit more about yourself. So everything I'm saying, I'm really saying it to you. I mean, in other times, there's 500 of you, we'd be in a hotel now, you'd all be together, you'd already had some nice coffee break, you'd be now probably thinking, what's for lunch? Who will I sit beside for lunch? You'd be really enjoying it, not necessarily for what I'm saying at all, you mightn't even be listening, but you would be there with loads of other people. Wouldn't that be nice? Like me, you'd be giving out about the carpet and wondering about the decor in the room, and is the hearing okay, and can you see, and what's going to be for lunch, and who will you sit beside? And all that is really, really good for when you go to a conference. But we don't really know that before we go to the conference. We think we're going for the thing we're going to listen to. But really, we're going for lots of other things. So try to just for today or for this session, think of a goal you want to get, and I'd like you to get one just for you. How can I learn something for myself that'll make me feel better at work and reduce my stress from work and my stress from non-work, because the barrier there has been very much skewed. So that's what we know about psychosocial hazards. They're complex, multidimensional, they interact differently, and they build up. So don't kill yourself if you're not as calm as the next person beside you, not beside you now, but metaphorically, who deals with stress differently, because it's all adding up. We don't see it. Things interact differently. It's multidimensional and complex. So psychosocial hazards are really stress, and it's to do with the meeting of the mind and body, or the person and the environment. And in our case, we're talking about the work environment. What we absolutely know is that a positive psychosocial environment, whether it's work or not, the exposure to it is linked to increased satisfaction, well-being, performance, and happiness. So people who are exposed to positive environments, it's linked to feeling good, performing well, and well-being. And adversely, people who are associated with or who are exposed to adverse psychosocial work or non-work environments, that's linked to negative health outcomes, including cardiovascular illness, including digestive disorders, including headaches, and including other physical malaise, as well as mental health difficulties. So we know that that's part of the science, or a science. So what do we talk about when we talk about links? And this is the important thing about psychosocial hazards. It's not, I stepped on the nail, so I cut my foot and I need a stitch. We can see that, we can take a picture of it. The nail punctured the skin, you need a stitch. It's not that simple. It's much more complex because there's loads of different psychosocial hazards. So they're linked. So it doesn't mean that one absolutely causes the other. It means there's a causal, chaotic cluster. Very complex non-work environment that we live in. The configuration of work and leisure is very important. So we call it work-life balance. Sometimes we all get jaded with that comment because why do we need that whole new literature on work-life balance when we know ourselves how to balance our days? Well, we know the information. We have the knowledge about life and work and leisure. Whether we employ that for ourselves, sometimes, well, that's up for discussion. You yourself should be thinking now, do I really, or do I just juggle? And then when it suits me, when I've got the time, I put in the balance. But when I don't have the time, I just can't put in the balance, which I know is a little bit funny, but that tends to be how we do it. Many things are more pressurizing than one or two things quite stressful. So having an array of different demands on us matters more because it takes energy to move from one thing to the other. So a person who's really busy, say at work doing two tasks. Now, I'm not negating the pressure and the potential stress from that. For instance, if you take too much time, you have too many deadlines, you can't move about, it's stressful. But if you've got stress from a home, two different home environments, a work environment and another environment, you have to change resources for each one and use different mental resources for each. And that is an extra stressor too. So there's an array of job and non-job stressors. Look, we don't opt out of life because it's stressful, and we don't opt out of work because it's stressful, and we don't opt out of friendships because they're stressful, or relationships or families, and they all have potential to cause stress. There are clusters in certain environments, both work and non-work. So lots of demands, an array of different demands, very high demands, very little social support, and very little control. Difficult. There are different trigger co-occurrence patterns for all of us. So when I speak to people who ring me about either stress or bullying or conflict or stress-related issues, there's a different trigger for people. And the trigger is not the thing. The trigger is just the trigger. There are other things behind the trigger. And often what a person reports is the thing when you speak. And that's why psychologists exist, I guess. So thanks for that. Because really, the trigger is just the end game. The mental health outcomes are varied. This is another kind of, I suppose it's a difficulty with the area because it's not the same as if you sit for 8 hours every day and you don't move and you've got the wrong posture, and as Frank has alluded to, you've got a bad ergonomic setup, you will have musculoskeletal problems and you will know it's from this because that's what you did for 8 hours. Mental health outcomes are different for different people and they can be mild to severe. So that's another difficulty, or it's another reality we have to put up with. So these are the issues with my area, psychosocial hazards. And they're not there for maybe other work areas that you're involved in presentations on and talks on. Individuals differ. That does not mean that we don't have to deal with the area of work-related stress or indeed stress. But it is true that a person can say, I wouldn't find that stressful. I hear that so much, both from my own friend group and from people who are involved with the work area I'm in, and from callers, and from people who are dealing with stresses. I wouldn't find that. Well, I wouldn't find that rude. I wouldn't find that offensive. I wouldn't call that bullying. I wouldn't. Yeah, all of us wouldn't, but individuals differ. And it's not to say that everybody can be validated. Every feeling is absolutely scientifically validated. But if a person feels it, then we have to look at it. We don't have to validate it by saying, yes, your interpretation of the behavior being rude is correct. No, but you can show a person how another way of looking at that might make you come up with a different conclusion. There's gaps in the evidence chain, the cause, the effects. Sometimes the effects put in place more causes. So for instance, if you feel very stressed, you feel distressed, you think it's because of something that was said to you at work or somewhere, and then the effect of that is that you withdraw a little bit and you're more surveillance oriented in that interaction. That more surveillance oriented withdrawal can cause a person to behave differently to you. I see this so much in the bullying sphere, where someone's interpretation makes them behave differently, and that behavior makes the other person behave differently. And when I'm then looking at this workplace issue, and I might report back to the person and say, but you behaved this way. Yeah, I did because they were behaving this way. Yeah, and see, they probably, like you, behaved differently because you were behaving differently to them. All behavior is a virus. You behave in a way and someone behaves in a way back differently to the way they would otherwise have behaved. It's contagious and it spreads too. So we need to watch our own behavior and then try and see if we can, not maybe manipulate is the wrong word, but then influence others' behavior to us to change the way things are unfolding. In terms of stressors, there are lots of mediators and moderators. Really, we don't use them enough. And I suppose for those of you who are in charge of workplaces who are here today, as well as for yourselves, if you can think of this for your risk assessments and for your policies and procedures and more for your operational processes. And mediator and moderators are things that either stop the flow of energy going one way, or they intervene with it and change it and put it in a different direction. So where stress is concerned, support and control, well-known model, the demand control support model. We use it in our Work Positive. It's basically one of the main models of stress. There are other models too, effort, reward, and balance, very good model too, and many other ones to do with novelty and change, and indeed technology now more so is brought into some of the newer models of stress. But all of the models have some things in common, and that is that if you put in place some control for the person over what they're doing, and that's very pertinent now with working from home, and if you put some supports, then that will hold on to or contain the output of stress. It doesn't need to go to mental health impairment or distress. It can be transformed into actually resilience. Because what resilience is it's not like someone is born a resilient baby. There's no resilient babies. What resilience is you're exposed to stressors and you've learned to deal with them in a way that is okay for you. So what we want to do with mediators and moderators is help the person to find a way, a route out of their distress through learning and then developing resilience. And then the next time it happens, they can say, as we all do, I remember that from last time, this kind of worked for me. And I'm different to you. So I'm not going to necessarily take the thing that you're offering me, Morris or Mary. I'm going to take the thing that works for me. One of the difficulties in this particular time where we're, very much messaged about all being kind of in it together, which isn't the same as all being the same, but sometimes we've interpreted that way and we tend to be going with kind of a group approach, whereas, as I'll say to you later in the program here, really you need to look at your own individual well-being here. And my approach and my goal for you for my session is really try and learn things that will help you in your individual well-being, because that feeds into, and that's what is really psychosocial resilience. So homework boundaries have always been problematic in terms of my area, workplace stress, because it's very difficult to remove the home from the person. And much more so now when actually the person has moved home and it's homework. And even that term isn't great for any of us, little memories going back. So it's a difficulty because you can't just take away stress from the individual differences, the gap in the evidence chain, that there are mediators and moderators, that there are boundaries. In our 2005 Act, for instance, it's not specified as a risk. There's no regulation on stress. It's not reportable of itself because it's not provable a priori that it's caused by work. We have Section 19, though, which is something we use a lot. Employers must assess the risk, and we have Section 20, put in place control measures. So for the generality of stressors, that's important, and also for specific, well-known, foreseeable stressors from specifically dangerous work, that obviously is even more pertinent. So if we move on now a little bit to just talk about you, because really what we're here for and what you're here for is you. The context for you is COVID. And what COVID really brought is a number of things which I won't go into because you know them. Because when we in psychology and social psychology, present on what COVID has caused, we're finding it out from you, from reports from you. So COVID is the context. Loads has changed, as you know, but uncertainty is one of the big things. The location is what I'm really going to focus on here, I suppose, the work location. I'm not talking about the physical. Frank has talked to that very ably. I'm talking about the psychosocial. So only the psychosocial is my remit. But obviously, there's always going to be a relationship between the physical and the psychosocial. Example, why do people blush? No one decides, I'm going to blush. Because especially teenagers, they don't want it. But something happens in the physical world. They see, hear something, someone says something. They could be just looking at something and someone else is there seeing them looking at it and they blush. So we have a psychological reaction which causes a physical manifestation, which we don't want. But if we said, oh, I'm going to give you some information now, Paul. People slag you when you blush, so don't blush. That'll do it. No, it won't. So the knowledge is not enough. So that's a bit of an analogy for stress. We know lots, but we still have an automatic response to certain things. And what we're trying to do, I suppose, is become aware of what those things are so that A, we can either avoid them, or even better, slowly expose ourselves to them and try and find ways of understanding the mechanisms so that we can blush less. or get used to blushing and think, I found a better way of dealing with it. God, I'm a bit embarrassed about that now. Yeah, you're right. So there's all kinds of ways of dealing with it. What we're going to touch on a little bit here is the online experience versus the in-person, because obviously that's one of the big kickers in this area. What the change to home has meant lots of physical changes, but in terms of our communication and in terms of our socialization, what's been replaced, as well as the myriad of things that COVID has brought about, that hopefully will be, being removed gradually and slowly over the next coming months. But what really has happened is we're communicating online instead of in person. Just a little few words about that. I know that all of us miss, and it's very important to have in-person contact and communication, and we can hug and touch and be in a room and laugh, and the whole area of in-person. But one of the massive benefits to it is that flow happens, where people talk and another person talks, and there's no need to stop and wait and talking over and standing back, and then a little bit of a disruption to the technology, and the timings are off, and so none of that is there. We don't have to worry about all of that. So we have much more resources just to relax, which when you're doing online, you don't have the same resources to relax. Even if you're doing a friends cocktail meeting on Zoom or book club or whatever, there's so much more resources needed to relax on a Zoom or on an online forum than there is in reality. And that's one of the real big things. You're expending resources in order to not expend resources. So sometimes people might think, at the end of it all, is it worth it? I mean, was it a relaxing, nice chat? No, there was so much time spent. So that's effort-reward balance or imbalance. One other model of stress, which is we don't want to spend too much effort for not so much reward. We have an idea in our head of the amount of effort and the amount of reward we get and that others get. And so it's stressful when that's changed for us, when we have to spend much more effort and get less reward. What we tend to do too is if we're spending a lot of effort in one modality or one area of life, we kind of have to make up for it in another. So we're going to spend less effort in the other area. So a bit of an analogy might be, if we're working from home, we're spending a lot of effort doing things that we otherwise didn't spend much effort with. Then we spend less effort maybe with some family things, because we have to make it up somewhere before we go to bed. Now, we're not planning this. No one thinks they're doing this. No one wants to do this. But effort reward balance is something we try and achieve, and we cross modalities with it. So what we want to look at then for you is main issues for you to reconsider for your improved well-being, and some tips on this. Considering that we know context is our key, we're working from home, we miss out on real life contact, and we put a lot of effort into online. It's a mistake to think that you just move something from in-person to online, because it's a huge bit more effort required. However, something that we misjudge about in-person, we think we're much better at judging people in person than we actually are. So some people have said, oh, it's much more easier to know what a person is feeling and thinking when I'm with them in the room. For instance, if you're doing interviews, you can really tell more. Online, you can't tell. We're not actually great at telling in person either. So there isn't a huge evidence base for that thinking. We're not great at interpreting other people and what they do and the flick of an eyelid and the turn of a head, but we like thinking we are. So we're enjoying the illusion of thinking we're great at knowing other people when we're in a room with them. And we're not great at thinking we understand them when we're online with them. The actual thing is not that different. But the real thing we're enjoying is just being able to relax and let things flow and happen. And the unpredictability of being with people and not having to organize or control or wait and take turns and all that stuff. So our changed work environment is what it is. Now, the SEPCB here, I just put that in, so don't bother Googling it. It's not a well-known acronym. It's the experience of working now and the implications of it. So these are social, emotional, psychological, cognitive, and behavioral. So just briefly, you know what social is, but it's absolutely eroded. So it's a context-specific consequence of working from home now. However, let's just think about working from home if there were no COVID. Working from home pre-COVID, as Frank alluded to there in his the Whitaker, the NUIG Whitaker survey, much less people worked from home, and much more people are going to work from home in the future. But the people who worked from home pre-COVID, usually they requested to work from home. Now, not all of them, but a lot of people requested it, and so they got something they requested. So already they're on the up, because once you request something and you get it, you're going to be happier doing it than if it was imposed on you. absolutely evidence fact. But also, most people who work from home, they have to rearrange their social life a little bit because they're not in the office anymore. And maybe they started off their job working from home, which is a different thing, and they get used to that. And you'll find that they say, oh, I arrange my social life quite differently because I don't have that workplace contact. Or people who work for themselves, or people who do isolated work, or lone workers. They are definitely at a disadvantage in terms of not only for the social connectedness that we all need, but also for the fact that you learn through other people and watching them do things. So even when we're looking at safety behavior, people who are lone working don't see the other people doing it safely. So they're much less likely to be quick to adapt to that. And because they're doing it themselves, they can make errors more that go unchecked and are not reinforced by the social group. So social togetherness, it's also complex because it depends on whether you used to be with the group, whether you didn't used to be. But for now, the experience obviously has been socially really reducing. Emotionally, again, that's connected to socially in that we don't have someone to talk to or to just whisper to or to say a nuanced comment to or someone to say how's it going, or so emotionally much more cut off. Again, psychologically, which is what we're thinking in our mind. So it's like how you're making judgments, how you're making decisions, and how you're thinking. That's really influenced by the social group. So when we're in work, our psychology is really influenced by what everybody else is thinking and doing, and how we're witnessing what they're thinking and doing, and we're part of the group that they're witnessing. So it's all interconnectedly, psychologically, very, very communicative without many words being said. So we really do have an anchor in other people for psychologically when we're in a workplace and when we're in a team and when we're in there every day. And also getting to work, leaving work, the public transport or the car or the radio, all the little habits we have. Cognitively, how we're thinking, how we're learning. As I said before, if you're with other people, you're learning by seeing, you're learning by hearing, you're learning by watching, and learning by knowing you're being heard, watched, and seen. So you're performing to an extent, and you have to perform. So you up your game when you're performing. So all of us, if people are looking at us, if people are around us, we're going to up our game a bit. So cognitively, we just step up a little bit. And behavior, then we behave differently. So the location of work has all of these influences on us. The experience of home has usually changed. So people often forget that when they're working from home. And afterwards they say, gosh, I didn't realize how much it was really going to impact my home life. I prefer working from home for my work side, but I wish I had a garage or an annex or somewhere that I could separate the working from home. I'd like to really be working from garage or working from beautiful steely office right beside my house that has a view of a river. So really, we forget the fact that it does erode home. So you have to find a way to reimagine work so that it's not contaminating home. It's actually just a part of home that you've worked well to make it fit in. Now, that also depends, as Frank was saying, on space and other things which are not my area, but obviously it's way better if there is a space, not just psychologically. My talk is on psychologically making space at home for it, but that will be very much aligned to the physical. Obviously, in COVID, our experience of family and friends has hugely eroded our sentient attachments and therefore has affected how we're working from home. So if there was a survey done of everybody in Ireland saying, how happy are you with working from home? And they said unhappy, I wouldn't think it's all because of working from home, because obviously sentiment will hugely have changed because of COVID. Deaths, fear, suddenness, all of those things are bad for our mental health. A sudden change, everyone has to change. There's fear of death, there's fear of illness, there's no attachment, there's no social cohesion. We can't go on holidays. Fun is a big part of life, not only the going on holidays, but the planning the holiday, the getting ready for the holiday, the buying for the holiday, and then after the holiday talking about it. I would venture to guess that is actually more for some of us than the actual holiday itself. So all of that extra stuff around fun and around lifestyle and like planning going out and coming home afterwards and then talking about it. So huge new context, new habits, new socio-technical arena, I suppose, because we're working from home. And also just think about the new cues. We habit by cue. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we're cued towards our habits. And when we're in a new environment, the cues are all skewed. They're not there. So previously, maybe at 11, you were cued to go for coffee. Maybe at 3, you were cued to kind of start going for a quick coffee, bring it back and start looking at finishing because you finish at 5. So all these cues, they're in the office. They're in the environment that you used to be in, whether it was an office or a factory or a shop or whatever. Another factor in the change environment is the emotional aspects of work. communication tasks are much more demanding at home, and communication tasks are emotional. They have an emotional quotient in them because you're communicating with other people. So you have to really be thinking of what others are thinking. So that's when you're communicating, you really are, or you should be, thinking what others are thinking. You're communicating a message and you have to kind of frame it so that they'll get it. And it's harder now because we have to frame things in a little bit of a nicer way. And also we're communicating with people, and it's usually by email. So there's an evidence there of how we communicate it. So again, a little more difficult. And another thing that's changed in our environment is how do we measure our contribution? So previously, say, when we were working in an office environment or a factory or whatever, often how we measure it is on the diary, how busy our diary looked. We look at it in terms of time spent. So people might presume an empty looking diary looks like someone did nothing, and a diary full of meetings looks like we did loads. Whereas when we're from home, working from home, it's easier to see the outputs. And for ourselves, often at the end of the week, we think, what did I do? It's easier when you're in work to just presume I was in there all week. It's Friday at 5. I've done my week's work. Yeah, I feel good. Whereas when we're at home, we tend to be maybe a little bit more fearing of what we performed or what we produced. And it is true that it is harder maybe to look at the output of what we do now than it used to be because we're in a new environment. We have different judgments on performance and what we did. So the crude deliverable of it, I was in the office, so I spent the time, so that's it. I mean, it's much more now moved to a holistic. What did I actually achieve? And how did I bring something to the organization I work with or the team I work with this week? That can be a good and a bad thing. Again, from my experience of callers to me, I think it's a good thing because querying what we're achieving, but it does mean shifting and pivoting. It means shifting into what is achievement, what is my job, what is my commitment, and what is my contribution. And it's not just filling a diary with meetings and time. It's doing things. And just because I'm doing them at home doesn't mean they're less valid or they're more, maybe I'm sitting on the sofa reading something that I need for a meeting. It doesn't mean it's not work. So these are the cues that might skew our judgment on what we're doing. And we really need to, as I'm saying, adapt to the new cues. You can sit on a sofa and read a document and then get back up and type up a thing, and that's still you working. So we need to just be aware of that in the changed environment. Okay, so I just want to just click in with you all here. You're all still there. Hopefully you're comfortable. If you need to stand up now and you don't need to see anything, my slides really, you're going to get a copy. You can just listen. So have a little bit of a stretch, relax. We're all on time, so we're going to be finished on time. You will be finished by 1:45, and I'm going to go on now to talk a little bit more about some tips. This is the background I've given you on where we're at and what the changes are, and now I'm going to look into a little bit more the next bit on tips. And to get any tips or to get any insights and to change our behavior or to look at things differently, you really need to look at what are the things about us that have stayed the same. So they're all the changes. We've all reacted differently. What are the things that have stayed the same about us? What do we know about human psychology and social psychology? What we know is we seek the familiar. We really do. I mean, even those of us, myself included, who like to think that we don't, that we're novel seekers. Yeah, we're different. We might be, and hopefully we are. We are a little bit, but we also really do like the familiar, and we need some familiar. And the familiar has been taken from us. So it could be, nobody says when they say, what makes you really happy in your day? Very few people say the inside of my car. But really, a lot of people, when they get up in the morning, they have their ritual of getting ready, they get into the car, they actually love that 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes, changing the radio station when they get annoyed with someone. Just the act of being annoyed with one of the radio presenters and changing it gives us a little bit of power. I know somebody who decided they were going to change the radio station to Lyric about 3 years ago and said a few months later, I met them and said, yeah, it's really worked for me. I just love that. It calms me out before I go to work. So driving, looking at the other bad drivers, making decisions, changing the radio station, maybe you have a coffee with you, whatever you do, that ritual of doing that is something that actually gives pleasure to people, and you seek it, it's familiar, it's every day. So that's been lost. No one says, I really miss sitting in the car. But in fact, that might be one of the things we miss because we seek the familiar. Look at it in our purchasing patterns. We're loyal to brands. Why? It's not because that brand is different or better. It's because we think we have a kind of an attachment to it and the brand has to us. I know. We're not always rational. So we'll stick with the tea bags or the whatever it is because that's the one we always buy. And it kind of it feeds into our identity. So we like the familiar. We like to surround ourselves with familiar things. We also seek social solace and attachments and norms. We really seek social solace a lot. And we don't know we do. Even those of us who maybe don't go and say, I'm seeking your solace now, friend. But we're making a call, we're reaching out, we're going for walks, or I think walks might be a bad word to use from now on. But we're meeting up with people and we're attaching to them and we're looking at what everybody else is doing. So we just seek that, and that was taken from us. And in uncertainty, again, we know this from evidence, from research, we tend to be more following. So we follow the in-group more in uncertainty. So in an uncertain environment where you think the answer to a query, say, is item C, but the 8 people around you are all saying it's item D, we're not sure, we'll go with D. Even if there was only one other person who thought it was D, we'd stick with our own decision. So we're not, in uncertainty, the uncertainty bleeds into our own judgments, and our judgments are influenced by the bigger social group. Some very interesting research done into certainty and decision making. You know, I'm sure you're aware of some of the great books out about on it, and obviously Danny Kahneman is big on this. I'm a big fan of his. But really, in times of uncertainty, judgment and decision making, we often pass the book over to the bigger group. Now that can work well for us at times, and certainly recently, obviously, it worked for us that we passed over the decision making to the experts. But we need to now take back our decision making just for our own self and our own well-being, and think, what are we going to do for us? Another thing that we know about ourselves is that our experience of a thing is really influenced by our expectations of that thing. And this is really borne out and used in marketing research. The sandwich test is a test where basically groups of people were brought together and asked about their favorite sandwich, and it was made for them, and they were given it. And yes, this is the favorite. This has got everything I want in it. And then they were asked what brands they use. They were exposed to the brand they use, and the one that would have been made up exactly the way they wanted it was a different brand. They all picked, or 90% of them picked, the brand they were loyal to over the other better sandwich in terms of what they said they wanted. So really what we tend to do in brand loyalty is to think that we want it because we're loyal to it. But our experience of it is, when we say this is 9 out of 10, half of that 9 out of 10, or a third of that 9 out of 10, is basically not the experience of the eating of the thing. It's that I expected this to be good, so now I'm going to say it's good. And I'm not lying. I'm not deceiving, other than myself. My experience has been infiltrated by my imagination about how good this is. Now, that can be bad and it can be good. Because if you're expecting that something is great, then you experience it as better. Nice. The problem is if you expect it to be bad, then you experience it as worse. And nobody's telling any lies. It's that we're very influenced in our experience of a thing by how we have pre-imagined it to be. So imagination is a hugely important area of life. We half live in our imaginations. We bring it into everything we do. So we can really harness that for our experience once we know about it. We're unreliable witnesses to what we do and why we do it. So when we're asked about what we did for the previous week, we report the highs and the lows. We don't report the middle bit. And the middle bit can often be quite rewarding. It just is not a high. So a 10-minute high and a 20-minute low become much more important in our memory than, for instance, a 2-hour absolutely fine and quite a nice, pleasant time solving a problem at work or with kids or with relations. But because it's in the middle, it's kind of mushy and we don't report it. But it's very important to try and think yourselves. And you can't really do this in memory because memory bypasses it. If you do it on a daily basis, it's easier because you're nearer to the time of the thing and think, what was this morning like? What was lunchtime like? What was this afternoon like? And then you can more accurately refuse the neurons about, yeah, that was quite pleasant doing that piece of work. I liked working with Joan and Mary and Bill on that Teams group. I enjoyed it. So you're just refamiliarizing yourselves with things that you really like because we're not great at saying it. And also we don't even tell ourselves the truth about why we do things because we want to look better than we really are. So tip to self, be honest with yourself. Nobody else will know about why you do things. Usually it'll be for some reason that makes yourself feel good. And we misreport our wellness because we don't want to be stigmatized by saying we're not well. We have unconscious bias. We spend a lot of time denying things and we want approval. So these things are harder to bypass. So we're not going to go into them too much, but just to know we don't really report our wellness. So better to have a knowledge of that. Now, behavioral science says that human behavior is not as predictable as we like to think. We're more complex. Our behavior can often be irrational, biased, and context-driven. We know it's irrational because we don't need half the things we go to the supermarket to buy. And we come back with things because we saw an ad for them, or someone else has them and it looks like it'd be nice to have that in your home. But in fact, it looks much nicer in the home store than it does in your home. But yeah, so we're irrational. We didn't need another small table or another light. We're biased in what we do because we're biased towards the familiar, the things we know, things we've tried and tested, and we're context driven. And I think context driven is very important for the working from home piece. Does context activate your behavior? Now, normally we're expecting 60 to 70 people at this webinar, and so we were going to have groups work a bit on this. I was going to have groups work on the context influencing behavior, but obviously we're not going to do it with over 500 people. But you think about it yourself. Does context activate your behavior? And if so, how? And if you're thinking it kind of does, like I can say even a certain room in my home activates behaviors. So sometimes people might say, I walk into the kitchen, I see the kettle, I feel like a cup of tea. Yeah. If you didn't see the kettle, you wouldn't. So if you want to reduce your tea, walk into the kitchen less. Just tell yourself, I'm not walking into the kitchen before lunch. So context is very important in how it activates behavior. And we know that because look at smoking. There's a lot of people who only smoke in the pub. So has their smoking reduced over COVID? There's other people who only smoke when they're drinking, and the drinking is in a pub. Has their smoking reduced because of that? Drinking, similar thing. A lot of people only drink in pubs or restaurants. They don't drink at home. Has it reduced, or have they changed the queue because it's gone on so long? Cinema, a lot of us only eat popcorn in a cinema. No one ever have a go for popcorn, but in the cinema, go for the popcorn. Supermarket, when you're in the supermarket, you buy the things you haven't thought before you got there that you wanted. They're well known in supermarket marketing to know that supermarket lighting, aisles, spacing, eye level is bi level, cues behaviors. Exercise, it cues behavior. In a gym, you're going to do it. You're outside the gym. You don't even want to walk to the car. You park as near you can to the entrance. A study done on gyms in the USA recently saw that people who buy a gym membership that's 4K or less from their home go 5 times a month. 5K and more go 1 time a month. So the distance from the gym kind of cues distance and time spent on something. Effort required for it cues the behavior. So if you want to set up a new behavior, you really think about the time it's going to take and the effort it's going to take. And often effort is distance from. And they cue it. So they're what's called facilitators of the doing of the thing. And then there are other things which are frictions. So joining the dots for you, in uncertainty, we seek the certain. So we had uncertainty, try and make certain for yourself. Make things certain and make them certain for now. Isolation in need of others. Try and set up things that are going to have others involved. We need to, first of all, get back used to dealing with others if we've been more isolated. We need to understand now how others are behaving and see us. We need to norm our behavior with the others. So we really do now need to be in touch with others. We've had sudden change, so we're reassessing and we're confused. Context cues behaviors. The new context is homework, and often we're not cued to be motivated because it's home. So that was a big difficulty for people. Sometimes it's the drive-in that cues us. We don't really know the cues, but it could be that the drive in the morning cues the motivation for the morning and work. So issues with motivation from work have come up in the Whittaker survey, and they may be coming up for you. I think they've come up for lots of us. And you need to look at the cues for behaviors. And if you need to set up new cues, then by cues I'm saying CUE for those not looking at the slides, not the other cue, which I think there should be a whole new phenomenon on our attachment to the Q, QUE, because I see so many queues. I wonder, are people just going out? I'm going to a queue tonight. See you there. People dress up to go to the queues. I mean, mainly they're younger people than me, but I do see queuing as the new black. So a new queue context means you got to look for the queues and set up queues in your home that are work oriented if you're finding yourself demotivated. There's emerging hazards from online environment too, in terms of being on the computer so much, and we need to follow the technology advice on that, which is really take much more breaks. Don't be sitting all the time at your computer. Don't be communicating only by computer. Pick up the phone, have a voice contact. Voice is underrated. A phone voice contact. We're very well used to it, and it can take the place of FaceTime sometimes, or indeed of email and written. Expectations are very influential to how you experience a thing, both positively and negatively. So don't forget that when you're setting up new things to do. How are you going to expect it? Expectations have been unreliable in the past because we didn't expect this to happen. So we're not that trusting. So we can't go forward now with this mindset of, well, it's going to be bad. Whatever happens, it's going to be bad. If we're back to work full time, it's not going to work. If we're doing a hybrid, it's not going to work. If we're at home, like, be aware that our trust has been eroded. if you get into that negative spiral, you're going to experience it as negative, and you don't want that. So really try and talk to yourself about, okay, we all had our trust broken here. It's no one's fault. These things happen. And now we're going to try and, could it be good? Yes, it could. Let me try and work out in my own mind how it can be good for me, because I know more about myself now, and then I'm going to go forward with that mindset. We make the least possible effort. We know that. Look at all of the technology giants. 1-click purchasing. 3 clicks we don't buy. 1 click we buy. 2 clicks they're out on. But we don't make that much effort. We want to reduce the effort reward imbalance across modalities. We're always trying to do it. We hold down onto outdated routines, even when we know they're outdated. Like online classes, you don't just bring the in-class experience to online. Lecturers know that you have to really change it. You have to give more breaks. You have to have more scheduling and planning for people to participate. You have to remind people of being together. You have to create, almost falsely create and exaggerate a sense of being together because you're not together, without insulting people by lying to them. So really, we often think that knowing all these things drives our actions. It doesn't drive our actions. It drives us knowing about them. What drives our actions is doing it, and then getting the feedback after doing it, and then thinking I'll do it again, or else making a decision. I'm going to do different things. I'm going to do different things because I want to reduce uncertainty. So to reduce uncertainty, what we do is we think and we plan and we do. So thinking, think for now, plan for now, and practice for now. Because we've been kind of living up to this on the past and the future. Past, future, past, future. And we're in this middle bit of transience. This isn't real, but this is real now. So we just think for now, because whatever you plan for now will be useful to you, whether you go back into full-time or hybrid or stay working from home. Think for now. What are the things you repeat daily and weekly? How do you feel before you do them, after you do them, and when you're doing them? Keep some, reduce some, and get rid of one. You'll find that there's one that is not helping you. Because now we're now, and that's what you should be doing. After a certain amount of doing, more is gained by 15 minutes reflection on the things you've done than by doing more stuff. This is from learning theory. So don't keep doing new things. Stop 15 minutes before the end of the day and reflect on these things. Don't leave it to the end of the week to do them, because one, you won't do it because you'll be dying to jump into the weekend and you won't remember properly. So it's better to do things at the end of the day. Planning, even those people who say, I don't like planning, now is the time to plan. You're going to have to, it's a coping mechanism, plan. Pre-thinking increases your learning, increases your doing, increases your cognition. Schedule your week and your month and your season even, but definitely your week. Work schedule by time and by day, morning, afternoon. It doesn't have to be a big spreadsheet, just even if it's just a jotted thing, morning, X, lunchtime, afternoon. Try and plan ahead. Do the things that suit you. I love this quote. Every mental representation of a movement awakens to some degree the actual movement, which is its object. Mental practice is what elite athletes do all the time. Mentally practice something. It awakens the connections neurologically that do the thing. So you become better at it. It works. So whether it's practicing piano or practicing how you're going to do your week, think about it in advance. Image it. It'll work. Differentiate your work from leisure time. Don't have it all as one big mush. It doesn't work. You need to have the boundary. And if the boundary is not there physically, you've got to make it mentally, which is absolutely doable. So just that you're working from home doesn't mean you don't have a homework boundary. You make boundaries and you exaggerate them, from scheduling to clothing to what you do. And then repeat things for 2 weeks. Actively do some things and passively do other things. Passively doing is still doing. Listening to a piece of music is doing something. It's just that it's a passive thing. And those of us too involved in active things should learn to do some passive things. Develop some pleasurable, joyful set pieces to help you in your leisure time. So that leisure isn't just idleness. But idleness is not leisure. Leisure is doing pleasurable things, both passively and actively. Build them into your day and into your week. I like this quote, the mind changes after the body acts. Sometimes we have great attitudes to things, sometimes not so good. But everyone's attitude to smoking is that it's not good for us, but people smoke. So the attitude stays behind. You don't need your attitude to change for you to change. Just change. And then your attitude will change. Solutions. Here we are. Individual and organizational. Focus on how you can control events. Focus on the things you can control. It's preferable to make a project out of some piece of work than just random acts of doing. Make it into a project, have 3 or 4 people, have a WhatsApp group on it, talk to each other about it and give it a time frame. We'll do this project, we'll do it over 4 weeks, we'll do it together instead of we'll each do our own little set piece. It keeps you connected to people. It keeps you, you've got something that a continuum, phases of a project, beginning, the middle, then near the end and the end. You've got a timeline. It's healthier, and it's a really good thing to be doing when you're working from home, when we're going through the change of nearly going back soon. Remember, what cues your behavior? There are friction to things and there are enablers. Intention matters. What's your intention? Get close to it. What am I intending to do this week? Or what am I intending to do today? At the end of the day, did I do it? I'll feel good. Individually, review yourself Friday afternoon. Prepare yourself Sunday night. This is a 5-minute thing. This is not something you take a pencil out for. You just review and think back. And you, on Sunday, do the same thing for 5 minutes. You'll sleep better. You'll sleep better Sunday night if you do 5 minutes for what the week's ahead. What would I like to get? Set weekly goals. Review them. Are you doing them? What did you not do? Don't worry about it. Next week, do another. No one's going to see. These are just private to you. Do an interesting new thing every week and every month. So reduce negative expectations consciously, because I've a little bit of a fear that the expectation of it's going to be bad no matter what happens. It can be good if you decide it's going to be good and make it good by setting goals and having good intentions. Talk through things, reduce random acts and create projects. And information isn't everything. Turn information into how-to thinking and doing. And that's it. We need to look at things we're missing in the past. We need to realize things are different. The digital impact, I think, is a big thing on my work and my health. You to think about that for yourselves. The social impact of isolation, communication and how to improve the online me. How can I be online better? And what are the personal consequences for you of this time? And how can you pay attention to making it better for the future? Thank you. I'll take some questions out, Barry, if you've got any there for me, and we'll just keep going now for 10 minutes on questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Patricia. I really learned a lot from that myself. Now, the first question I have here, and again, I'd just like to remind anybody, if they do have any questions, please use the Q&A function. But the first question is, if you're working in an environment that you find is getting more and more stressful and affecting personal health, but could be resolved by management, how is the best way to approach management about this, as it would be ultimately asking old dogs to learn new tricks?
Okay. I know. I mean, I can sense the cynicism in the questioner as well, and I get it. But one of the easiest things to do when we have a problem is to just blame other people. Like, it is really one of the easiest things to do. And obviously, I'm not saying that in your instance there's not blame other words. But the first thing is, what's the cause of the problem for you? What is the cause of the stress? And if you can really say it's this and it's this and this, then ask yourself a few times, let me look at it from someone else's perspective. Perspective taking really helps us see things. Even if we don't want to do it, if you say, what would John think of this situation and what would Mary think? Two colleagues say, and they think this. It makes you see it from different perspectives. And once you have done that, then go to management. I would say the best thing is a small, short email to, an approachable manager and say, I want to have a meeting. I've got some issues here in work. I have some solutions myself. I'd like to bring them to you. Can we have a phone call? I wouldn't go into it in a big email. That's what I do. And then I'd say, can we organize a phone call? Half an hour should do it. I'm looking at your diary. Does this suit her? When suits you? And then make up a phone call and then speak over the phone about it. But don't talk about it as a big, long story. I would say keep the 3 bullets. The 3 things I've identified, I've thought about it a good bit, John. One of them is the amount of work. I'll give you a bit of an example. Another is that whatever it is. And a third is this. And my solutions are kind of like around these areas. What do you think? So start a conversation with it. Don't come with the negative expectation that the old dogs aren't going to change the new tricks. The management, they weren't born managers. Like, they got there, so they probably know what it's like. So just be open-minded.
Thanks, Patricia. I have a question from Susie, and Susie wants to know, if an organisation was looking to plan a session for staff on transition back to workplace or hybrid model, what background should the trainer have? Is there a template for training, and what should be covered on the issues Patricia has covered?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think, first of all, it would be a great idea for employers to access some kind of, like, training might be a broader word than needed, but some kind of sessions or, moving back to work to the workplace sessions. Just what are the things? Some of them won't be psychological at all. Some of them could be to do with the use of the lift, use of the premises, the timings people come back at. It's really good to give information to employees going back to work. The information and that level will really reduce anxiety. Does everyone have to come back at the same time? Can we stagger start times? It would be a good idea if you could. Can you stagger end times so that everyone's not trying to go to the stairs or lift together? Is there a policy around lift usage and all those things? Great idea to do that. If you want to talk about my area, like the psychosocial or this mental health related issues of going back to work, then really you should be using, I would think, a mental health expert or someone who's trading in that space. So they're going to be, and you give them the brief. You're focusing on the mental health aspects or the psychosocial aspects of returning to work. Now, obviously, the Psychological Society of Ireland, where I'm a member, has a division of work and organisational psychology. You could definitely approach those people. Whereas we don't recommend any outfit because we don't recommend or promote any private practice. You need to look at consultants who have that offering. So it's not just somebody talking about the physical. You need someone who's got an expertise in looking at how people might be anxieties and stresses and strains and issues for returning to work.
Thanks, Patricia. I have another question here. How do you deal with the feeling that you always need to be on, as in answering phone calls and emails, etc.? How do you manage that?
Well, you have to, that's a self-management thing. And one of the things I mentioned in my talk here is about cues, like how things cue you. If you're, for instance, if you always have your phone on and beside you and it's beeping, then it's too big an ask to say to someone, don't do it. So you have to impose on yourself what you would impose on someone that you really care about. So what I often say to people who are working in high-level jobs and often I say, what would you do if it was your just left college, daughter or son, or just left school? You'd say, put the phone away, because you'd want them to be healthy. So what you do to yourself is you say, okay, it's 7, I'm putting the phone away. I'll check it at between 9 and 5 past in case anything urgent is there. Otherwise, I won't be looking. It's really hard, but you have to, it's like the thing I said, do the behavior, the attitude will follow. So also we have new legislation on the whole right to turn off from work, as you well know. I'm sure everybody in the audience does. But what you need to do first of all is have a cue yourself. Don't sit in the room where the work is done after the times you're not going to be working. Don't maybe wear the clothes you wear when you're doing the working. Put something else on. Go out, break up the work from non-work. Go out for a walk with no phone in the time between, because that would be what you'd be doing in your car. You'd be driving home. So try to mirror the things that you used to do in work when you used to cut off. Or was it the case that when you were in work you didn't cut off either? In which case you use this as the time. Try it out once and see how bad is it if I don't put the phone on at all from 7 until the next morning. Is the world still here? You'll find it is. So you need to impose things on yourself gradually. Do 2 first. Try it for a week. See how it goes. Do the behavior. Your mind will follow.
Just to follow on to that, Patricia, I have a question from Vincent. Vincent wants to know, how do you decide when to disconnect? I get the planning on a Sunday evening, but it's still Sunday.
Yeah, it is Sunday, but I'm saying that it helps you to give it. You're not taking out a book. You're not taking out a paper. You're thinking. Like thinking has really can help you if you just do it in advance. And you're thinking so that it'll help you for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You're thinking, what is on this week? What time is my start time? What's my first schedule? You're just thinking for 5 minutes that connects enough of your mindset to what you're going to do to then let it go. Now, I'm not saying you think and then you've got it for the whole evening. That would be counterproductive. I'm saying you do this as a 5-minute slot and then you let it go. Because what happens otherwise is people have lingering things that pop in and pop out, and they're not the controller. They're not the controller of the gatepost of their work mindset. And so it's coming in all the time on Sunday evening. Whereas if I say, if you think about it between 9 and 5 past, or 5 to 9 and 9, and then you let it go. You're not thinking about it again. You're thinking about it. You're the gatekeeper of what you're doing. And you're saying to your mind, no, this is what I'm doing. I know that there'll be thoughts coming back in and thinking, but what you've got to try and do is take control of the thing rather than just saying, I can't. It's going to come in and out of my mind. You find that does not happen unless you facilitate it or you've gotten into bad habits about it. So it might be the case that you have to decide, I'm going to watch a movie every Sunday evening. I'm going to start it at 9:05 with the family or with the cat or whatever. I'm going to always have a nice movie that I watch, because rather than letting the mindset be disturbed, I'm going to do another activity that will make sure it can't intervene because I'll be actually doing something else. Or I'm going to do the crossword every Sunday evening. I normally do it Saturday afternoon. I'll keep it for Sunday because I'm doing something else that will take my mind off.
Thanks, Chris. I've got a question from Deirdre. Deirdre wants to know, what's the best approach for conducting workplace stress assessments?
Okay, well, the best approach is to, I suppose, look at any complaints you've had. Look at the kind of work that's being done. That's the crucial thing. What's the kind of work that's being done? Is it intrinsically stressful? Is it intrinsically mildly stressful? Or is it intrinsically not stressful? Look at the complaints you've already had. If there's any stress complaints if you're in HR, you've got access to that. And then without that, then try and do a generic assessment. For instance, Work Positive is one of them. It's an online survey. It's free. So you could do that. You could do another one, but you could develop your own one and assessing what are the main risks in this environment. Are they coming from dealing with people, from customers, from each other, from technology? And then looking at how do people rate that? Are they rating it high or low in terms of risk? So you're trying to get a sense of what people are saying about the stress risks here. And then you're also asking them, how are they generally, we use the WHO5 in the Work Positive tool, which is just World Health Organization 5 items in terms of sleeping, eating, ruminating, which is anxiety thinking, relating, and relaxing. And how are they on those things generally, to get a sense of their well-being. And then you get a rating of your employees. They're reasonably well in terms of their behaviors. Got a lot of people aren't sleeping well. We might give a talk on that or assess that more. And then we're looking at the workplace psychosocial risk assessment, and we're finding there are stresses coming out from relationships. So we need to look at relationships. What's that about? And the other ones look fine. So you can do work positive, you can do another one. What you should be doing is, and particularly for high stress environments, you have an absolute duty to be doing risk assessments a priori. But in regular environments, you still should be doing assessments to look at what are people saying, and also look at what's your system if people do report stress. What do we do? Do we do a return to work interview? Do we talk to them about what's the cause of stress? Is it work related and non-work related? It may well be that people reporting stress are saying it's non-work related, in which case it's not your business. Like, apart from just to make sure that the person is capable of doing the job they're doing, and that means that they're fit for work.
I've got it's not really a question, Patricia. It's more of a tip, and that comes in from Magella. Magella says, Patricia, I take a photograph of my calendar for the coming week every Friday evening, and I look at it for a minute on Sunday night, so I know what my week ahead looks like. It really helps.
Yeah, I can imagine that being good too. And if you're very visual, that really would help too. It's just it's not done to try and make the week come into someone's weekend. It's done to try and do the opposite, really. It's just done to say, now when I wake up on Monday, I'll feel smoother. I'll feel a better flow. I'll have a better shower experience because I know that I'm sitting down knowing a bit about what the week is. We like certainties, and it bypasses our awareness of how much we like certainties. It's just we like certain. Now, we also like uncertainties, so don't get me wrong. We like the whole unpredictability of speaking to strangers at the bus stop, which we have missed a lot. So I'm not saying make it all certain. I'm saying we have to kick in some uncertainties too, but just hold on to the certainties we have, because we need a good balance of uncertainty and certainty.
Listen, just to keep us on time, Patricia, I'm going to finish up there. I'd like to thank everybody who asked questions here this morning, and I'm going to hand back to Darren. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barry.
Great. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Patricia. Just to wrap up, just to keep us all on time, again, I'd like to just thank my colleagues, Frank and Patricia, for their presentations. And I've no doubt that hopefully you've all something to take away from those, just as Patricia was talking about cues or context cues, behavior. I certainly know when I walk into my 13-year-old son's bedroom, that certainly has an effect. So the way I manage that now is I just don't go in. So I'd like to thank Hugh in the back, who's been in the background, that's taken care of the ICT and kept the show on the road, and especially Barry, our fantastic moderator there on the Q&A. But most importantly, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us, and thanks again for all those questions. I know we didn't get to them all, and Frank had just highlighted one that was in there about if trained internal assessors can carry out assessments. Frank just wanted to say yes, that's not a problem if you have internal trained. I think there's other questions there. There's one that stuck out in relation to injuries at home, and are they reportable? And you'll see in our work guidance that yes, I mean, if you do have an injury, it's not just constrained to ergonomic risks or psychosocial hazards. If you do have a spill of coffee and you're working at your desk at home, yes, that's potentially that is reportable. Or if you've a trip and it relates to work activity at home. So again, you'll have to appreciate that there is nuances and all of that, and it really is a matter of looking at each case on its own merits. So basically, I just finally also would just like to highlight, if you go to our home webpage, there's a banner there that is promoting the European campaign on musculoskeletal disorders that's been run by the European Agency for Safety and Health. And currently, we're looking for good practice examples. So if you have any good practice examples from your own workplace around musculoskeletal issues, you can actually submit those to us at the press office at hsa.ie to our colleague Gavin Lonergan. So if you click on the banner, you'll see it there. Good work, healthy workplaces, lighten the load. You can use that. So basically, just want to wrap up and say again, thank you for joining us, and please stay safe whether you're working whether you're in the workplace or you're working at home, and keep an eye on our events page. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.